Here's what to know before watching the 5th and final season of Stranger Things. Spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen the show, what are you doing here? It all started with the vanishing of Will Byers. On November 6, 1983, in the small quiet town of Hawkins, Indiana, Will encounters a terrifying creature and disappears from our world. Throughout Season 1, the rest of our characters are essentially trying to solve the same mystery. Where is Will Byers? First are Will's friends, Mike, Dustin, and Lucas. While searching for Will in the woods, they happen upon a strange girl who calls herself Eleven. The boys soon realize that Eleven's appearance and Will's disappearance must be connected. Our next group is the pairing of Joyce, Will's mother, and Jim Hopper, the town sheriff. In Hopper's investigation, all clues eventually lead back to the Hawkins National Laboratory. Hopper soon starts to suspect they're covering up a massive conspiracy. Joyce, on the other hand, starts to notice that the electronics in her house are acting strange. She realizes that wherever Will is, he seems to be communicating with her through the lights.
What should I do?
And our third group are the teenagers, Nancy Wheeler, Mike's older sister, her boyfriend Steve Harrington, and Jonathan Byers, Will's older brother. They get pulled into the story when Nancy drags her friend Barb to Steve's house for a party. She is then attacked by a creature and disappears, just like Will. Without knowing it, Jonathan captures this on camera because he's hiding in the woods taking pictures of everybody. This is of course very creepy, which results in Steve threatening Jonathan. But Nancy overlooks it because she wants to see if Jonathan's photos have any clues as to where Barb is. Sure enough, they discover that Jonathan photographed the creature. They determine that this thing is responsible for taking both Will and Barb, and they need to hunt it down. Hopper's investigation eventually leads him and Joyce to a woman named Terry Ives. Terry is now in a catatonic state and lives with her sister, but she was once part of some government experiments. Before she became like this, Terry used to claim that the government took her daughter Jane from her. And who do we think Jane might be? 11 recognizes a picture of Will and tries to explain to the boys that Will is hiding from the monster. Using their Dungeons and Dragons knowledge as a metaphor, the boys decide to call it the Demogorgon. From their science teacher, the boys learn about the concept of alternate dimensions. The other worlds exist alongside ours but aren't accessible by humans unless we open a gate through time and space. And this is where we start to learn more about Eleven through flashbacks. She's been living at the Hawkins lab as part of some kind of secret government experiment, which is led by Dr. Martin Brenner, who Eleven calls Papa. Using a sensory deprivation tank to amplify her powers, Eleven can use telepathy to tap into other people's minds. Because it's the 80s, the government of course uses this to have her spy on agents in the Soviet Union. But Eleven's powers are even stronger than that. She is able to see into an alternate dimension. The boys call it the Upside Down. While looking for a Soviet spy, Eleven accidentally encounters the Demogorgon. She's so terrified that her powers open a tear in space-time, opening a gate between our dimension and the Upside Down. Now, the government goes to great lengths to cover all this up. They assassinate people that have come across Eleven, they brainwash Terry Ives, they even fake Will's death so that everyone will stop looking for him. So when they find out where Eleven is, the kids are in serious danger, but they underestimate Eleven's abilities. After the kids escape, all of our main characters come together and connect the dots. They build a makeshift sensory deprivation tank for Eleven to find Will and Barb in the Upside Down. Unfortunately, Barb is a goner, but Will is alive hiding in his fort. Joyce and Hopper go to Hawkins' lab and negotiate a deal with the government. If they can go through the gate and get Will from the Upside Down, they'll keep all of this quiet so the government isn't exposed. Meanwhile, Jonathan and Nancy determine that the only way Joyce and Hopper will survive is if they distract the Demogorgon. So they lay a bunch of traps for it at the Byers' house. The kids stay behind to keep Eleven hidden, but the government tracks them down. To protect her new friends, Eleven wipes out the entire squad of agents. But this unfortunately attracts the Demogorgon, which doesn't turn out so well for Dr. Brenner. Eleven then sacrifices herself to destroy the Demogorgon and save her friends. Joyce and Hopper manage to find Will and bring him back to this dimension. But we get a hint that Will may not be saved after all when he coughs up a slug-like creature. Which brings us to Season 2. It's now 1984. While the group is thrilled to have Will back, Mike is heartbroken over losing his first love, Eleven. Dustin and Lucas, however, are looking to add someone new to the group, Max Mayfield, who just moved to Hawkins from California. As part of the deal Hopper made with the Hawkins laboratory, Will is still under their supervision, but Dr. Brenner has been replaced by Dr. Owens, who seems much nicer. Will reports seeing visions of a giant, shadowy, spider-like monster in the Upside Down, but the doctors chalk it up to PTSD. Meanwhile, Hopper has a secret up his sleeve. He returns to his remote cabin where Eleven is waiting for him. Turns out when she defeated the Demogorgon, she transported herself to the Upside Down. But she found a gate and came back where Hopper found and hid her so she wouldn't be taken by the government again. They now have a father-daughter kind of relationship. Will's visions of the Upside Down get worse until he tries to face the creature he keeps seeing. This goes horribly wrong and Will ends up possessed by the monster. The creatures from the Upside Down act as a kind of hive mind and Will is now part of it. The group learns that the thing controlling Will isn't an animal like the Demogorgon. It's an evil entity with plans of its own. It's given another D&D inspired name, the Mind Flayer. The Mind Flayer has managed to expand the Upside Down further into our world, and there is now an entire tunnel system underneath Hawkins. Even though he's possessed, Will is able to tell the rest of the group through the Morse code that the only way to stop the Mind Flayer is to close the gate. In the end, 11 uses her powers to close the gate and banish the Mind Flayer back to the Upside Down. Will is back to his old self and everybody is reunited. The only problem is that the Mind Flayer isn't very happy about being defeated and clearly has plans to try and overtake Hawkins once again. That brings us to Season 3. It's now July of 1985. Our first group this time is Robin, Steve, Dustin, and Erica, Lucas's younger sister. They end up discovering that there is a fully operational Russian base underneath the Starcourt Mall. The goal is to open another gate to the Upside Down. They had been trying to do it in Russia, but decided the gate would be more stable in Hawkins since there had already been tears here. And I know this plot sounds kind of ridiculous, but it's actually the epitome of the 80s. The ultimate fear of the Red Scare, this idea that communist Russia was secretly taking over our society, would be something exactly like this. That right under the nose of something so purely American as a shopping mall, the Russians would be plotting our demise. Now for a good chunk of the season, one of the other groups is Mike, Lucas, and Will in a kind of standoff with Max and 11. This is pretty innocent middle school back and forth kind of stuff, until 11 uses her telepathic powers to spy on Billy, Max's stepbrother. Similar to how Will was possessed last season, Billy is now operating as an agent of the Upside Down. He lures people to a remote location and then they are also possessed by the Mind Flayer. Separately, Nancy and Jonathan are piecing together that something is going on in Hawkins as they encounter people with strange behavior. Little do they know, these people are being possessed by the Mind Flayer. And for our last group, Joyce and Hopper team up with Murray Bowman and learn about the Russians' goal to open up a new gate. All these plotlines converge when the Mind Flayer finally calls upon all the people that Billy has infected. They eventually turn to goop and form a physical version of the Mind Flayer. But the question is, why would it want to do this? Well, the Mind Flayer has realized that the one thing stopping it from taking over our world is 11. She closed the previous gate, so it just needs to get rid of her. This leads to a battle against the Mind Flayer at Hopper's cabin. 11 is able to fend off the creature, but she's wounded in the process. Everyone meets up at the Starcourt Mall, where the goal is to stop the Russians from operating the gate, which will, by extension, stop the Mind Flayer. Joyce, Hopper, and Murray go down to the gate, and the rest of the gang faces off against the Mind Flayer. The only problem is that 11 has overexerted herself fighting the Mind Flayer, and her powers are gone. And as the Mind Flayer's little helper, Billy shows up to be more of a problem. However, 11 reminds him of his most cherished memories that she saw earlier when they made a telepathic connection. He then chooses to sacrifice himself to save the rest of the group. Down in the Russian base, Hopper also sacrifices himself to disable the Russian equipment and close the gate. Having lost her father figure, 11 now joins the Byer family. With too much grief in Hawkins, they all move to California. Season 4 starts 8 months later in 1986. A new evil has come to Hawkins. We first see this when Chrissy meets her end at the hands of Vecna. Vecna, once again named after a D&D character, is some kind of entity from the Upside Down. He preys on the vulnerable, using psychic powers to make them see the things they fear and eventually taking their life. When this happens to Chrissy, she just so happens to be in Eddie Munson's trailer. Eddie is the leader of the D&D group known as the Hellfire Club, which includes our old pals Mike, Dustin, Lucas, and eventually Erica. Things only get worse when Vecna claims another victim, turning the town into a frenzy. So Eddie goes into hiding, but Dustin is able to convince Max, Steve, Nancy, and Robin that Eddie is innocent and they need to help him. Our second group is out in California. Mike has gone to visit the Byer family only to find out that 11 is having a terrible time adjusting to normal life and is constantly bullied. But when the government finds out about the spooky things going on in Hawkins, they snatch Elle out of the blue. Turns out it's good old Dr. Owens again, and he's actually leading a faction of the government that believes 11 is the key to saving our world from being taken over by the Upside Down. The other part of the government, led by Jack Sullivan, believes 11 is actually responsible for what's going on in Hawkins and is trying to hunt her down. Owens takes 11 to a secret facility where she can regain her powers. Once there, 11 discovers who's really in charge, Dr. Brenner. Turns out he wasn't killed by the Demogorgon and is now trying to finish what he started. 11 agrees to go through the process so that she can save her friends from Vecna. And you might be thinking, why isn't Joyce helping? Well, because Joyce is headed to Russia with Murray. Because guess what? Hopper didn't die. But he was captured by the Soviets. It's now up to Joyce and Murray to rescue him. Back in Hawkins, things get much worse when the gang realizes that one of Vecna's targets is Max. Nancy and Robin do a little investigative work and discover that Vecna has actually attacked people before. Years ago, the Creel family fell victim to Vecna, but it was blamed on the father, Victor. The group realizes that at each of the places where Vecna has taken a victim, a gate to the Upside Down is formed. Vecna's real goal is to open 4 gates to destabilize the barrier between our world and the Upside Down. He takes his third victim in the middle of the lake, and even though Max has been saved for now, she's still the final target. Meanwhile, over in Russia, Joyce and Murray manage to sneak into the prison and save Hopper at the last minute from a Demogorgon. Turns out the Soviets have been feeding inmates to the Demogorgon while they research it. Back at the bunker, 11 is recovering her powers by unlocking suppressed memories. From her memories, we learned that there were many kids in the Hawkins lab experiment, but they all met a gruesome end. And it's starting to look like 11 is responsible until we meet this guy. He tells 11 that Dr. Brenner is a liar, the lab is a prison, and they need to escape. He proves that he knows what he's talking about when he reveals that he is actually 1, the very first Brenner experiment. So 11 agrees to help 1 escape. At the same time 11 is reliving those memories, Nancy is surprise attacked by Vecna. With their telepathic connection, we finally learn that Vecna was once Henry Creel. He was actually the one responsible for the death of his mother and sister, and his father took the fall. Because of his psychic powers, Henry was discovered by Dr. Brenner and taken to the Hawkins lab where the experiments began. Henry lived for years in the lab, biding his time until 11 came along. Once she agreed to help him escape, he launched an attack on the lab. But he didn't stop with the scientists. Henry wiped out the children so that nobody could threaten him. Knowing that 11 was the most powerful, he left her alive and hoped she would join him, but instead, 11 overpowered Henry and banished him to another dimension. It was there that he became Vecna. At first, the process severely injured him, but then he soon discovered the entity that we came to know as the Mind Flayer. With his powers, he forces it under his control, and we learn that it's been Vecna/Henry/1 pulling the strings all along. After unlocking her memories, 11 regains her powers and decides to return to Hawkins. But things go haywire when Sullivan shows up to try and stop her. Dr. Brenner dies while trying to save 11, and Owens is captured. But with her newfound powers, Elle stops the government forces in their tracks. Mike and the others arrive just in time to save her. With all the new information they've learned, the gang and Hawkins hatches a plan. To lure Vecna out, Max will allow herself to be attacked. Meanwhile, Vecna's physical body will be vulnerable in the Upside Down, so Steve, Nancy, and Robin will attack him while Max provides that distraction. Dustin and Eddie act as decoys so the creatures of the Upside Down come after them instead of the others. 11 decides she can protect Max from Vecna remotely. 11 and Vecna soon face off inside of Max's mind, and 11 loses this fight, so Max dies. In the Upside Down, Eddie makes a noble sacrifice to give the group more time, but succumbs to his injuries. But thanks to support from Mike, 11 is able to attack Vecna once more. At the same time, back in Russia, Hopper and the others have learned that the kids are trying to fight Vecna. Because it's a hive mind, they know if they attack the Upside Down creatures here, it will weaken Vecna there. So Hopper does just that. Then, at the same time as that, Robin, Steve, and Nancy get to Vecna's body and light him up. Between all 3 of them, they are able to push Vecna back for the moment. 11 then uses her abilities to revive Max, though she's still severely injured. And it turns out that her temporary death was enough. The 4th gate opens, and suddenly all of Hawkins is thrown into chaos. Vecna has disappeared, but it's not long before he shows that his plan is falling into place. And that's where we've left off before our finale season. So are you excited for the final season? What are some of your theories? Let me know what you think.